Hey, what's going on, best ever listeners? I'm your host, John Casmon, here for Multifamily Mastery, and I'm really excited to talk to Ed Mathews today. Ed, how are you?
I'm good, John. Good to see you again. How you been?
Likewise, doing great. I've had the pleasure of hosting Ed on Multifamily Insights, and it's great to get him here on Multifamily Mastery. Ed, for our listeners who are not familiar with you and your story, why don't you take a minute or two and give them a little bit more context on your background?
Yeah, former Silicon Valley tech guy. Spent about 24-ish years flying all over the country and in some cases all over the world, slinging software and services, and got tired of spending 150 nights a year on the road and was missing too much with my, good stuff with my daughters. So started to build a portfolio back in 2011. And it was a classic bootstrap kind of thing, right? I bought as I tell people jokingly, I mean, we're a value add player right now, and I buy crappy apartment buildings from landlords who kind of suck at their jobs, right? And so that's where I started. And so we bought a 4-family here in Connecticut, and then I would flip a couple houses, take that capital, go buy another multi, flip a couple houses, buy another multi, rinse and repeat. Did that for 7 years as a side hustle. And then in 2018, I realized that, like I said earlier, I was tired of flying around the world. And so I, basically resigned from my role at DocuSign and started full time in February of 2018. So it's been 7, almost 8 years.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, your story is one I know a lot of listeners can relate to, right? You were in a corporate career, flying around the world, working in the software industry, started building up your own personal portfolio, flipping properties, buying some larger multifamilies to hold into the portfolio. And then about 7 years ago, you decided to go full time into it.
Yeah.
What happened 7 years ago that made you ready to make that transition?
It's kind of a funny story. So I was in a conference room with 2,500 or so of my colleagues and DocuSign. So that was like 6 months before it went public. So it was a really fun and exciting time. And Keith Kroc, who was the chairman at that point, I had worked for Keith a couple of different times over the course of my career. And he's one of those guys that you follow. Like if him or a member of his team calls and says, "Hey, I want you," you pick up the phone, right? And so I was standing there with my team, and he was doing what I affectionately refer to as his laser light show, which means he was lighting up the room and getting everybody excited about what was coming up. And I was standing there like, he's right, totally right. I can't do this anymore. And turns out my boss got promoted, and through kind of a corporate thing, the new guy was like, "I need to kind of figure out the team." And I'm like, "No need, I'm done. And here's my resignation," and off we go. And so I did that January 2nd, and I left February 2nd, and here I am.
So you're just sitting in that room realizing your passion for the vision, even though Keith had been able to get you riled up for years. In that moment, you realized that passion was no longer there.
I loved my job. I loved everything about it. I loved the people. I loved the customers. I loved the chase. I loved the puzzle that is software and services. My problem was I missed my kids and my wife, and I had gotten to the point in my career where, I had run a couple of companies, and it was an interesting experience. It's one of those, you walk in, you sit at the desk and go, "Okay, is this all there is? This is what I've been doing for, 18, 20, 25 some odd years." And so, I had taken a step kind of backwards in DocuSign just to kind of take on less responsibility, thinking that would solve the problem. And I'd, relight that fire. And I was there for, almost 4 years, but 3 years. But I just, I went in head first. It was awesome. I had a blast. And about, a little after coming up on the third year, I'm like, this flying all over the place is just not me anymore. I'm missing parent-teacher meetings. I'm missing soccer games and choral concerts and swim meets and, all the stuff that, a friend of mine said to me after this. You only get 18 summers with your kids. And that, that has rung true for me for the last decade. Now they're 23 and 18 and, starting adulthood and starting, my youngest is off to college in 9 months or, a year. And, so it was actually one of the easiest decisions I ever made.
Yeah, when you have your priorities straight and you understand what you value, like your body, your emotions start to, really rebel when you're not living that. And
So
I can
true, John.
and it's crazy because, and I think you and I had this conversation before, but for me it was my son's birthday, a similar thing. I had to fly out for a shoot and I didn't have to travel that often, but I
Yeah.
missed his actual birthday
Yep.
and it just ate at me and I didn't know why, but what I realized was two things I valued most or that I believed to be true about myself, the values I held personally were in direct conflict because
Yeah.
I valued
Same.
being a trusted, reliable team member, somebody you could count on. John's going to figure it out. You got a problem, give it to him. He's going to show up. But I also value being a present father. And son was young enough where, he didn't really care, but to not be there on his birthday, it triggered me so much and it angered me because these two beliefs that I held deeply about myself were in direct conflict and I felt
Yep.
like I chose the wrong one.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that part until, weeks later of why I was so angry because I shouldn't have been that angry. Like, I mean, I looked around the team and there was nobody else on the team who could go to the shoot but me because I was the only one who had that experience.
Right.
At that point, we were pretty lean as an operation, but it really ate at me, and that's when I realized I really need to focus on my exit plan. Hey, when
Yep.
we come back, we're going to take a little short break here, listen to a word from our sponsor. But when we do come back, we're going to talk about how to take that feeling and turn it into action with your first investment. So real quick, we got a quick break here for our sponsor. All right, and we're back. So we were talking about your transition, Ed, sitting in that room in corporate, realizing this was not for you, but you had already started to build up a little bit of momentum with your investments.
Yep.
So for our
Absolutely.
investors who recognize this is what they need to be doing, talk about finding and funding that first deal.
So that first deal I actually did out of my back pocket. And so, I was in sales. And so every once in a while, a nice fat commission check would walk in the door and I'd put it in a 401k and a little bit in the stock market and probably 5-10% of it. I'd go out and have fun with my wife with it. And, I realized in 2010-11 that in order for me to get where I wanted to go life wise, and I didn't know it was time freedom at the time, but that's kind of what I was thinking about. I didn't define it that way, to be honest. But um, the idea being that if I didn't start something that was going to grow faster than the needs of my family financially, that I was going to work until I was 65, 70 years old, and I didn't want to do that. And so the whole idea was initially was just, this is, first it was a rainy day fund and then it was a, retirement and then it was freedom. Right. And so funding that first deal I did out of my back pocket. And I look back, that's why I was flipping houses so often, is because, I had a trusted general contractor and crew that I could go buy a crappy apartment building or a single family home that needed some love and hand it over to them and know that, as soon as we agreed on a scope, they would execute and do it well. And so that gave me the freedom to go back to my W-2 job and focus on that work and, nights and weekends basically, and occasionally a lunchtime phone call or maybe during hours every once in a blue moon. I would basically run those projects, at least be the manager of the manager. Right. And so we got real good at that and did that for like 7 years. And in that time, I never actually raised any money. I didn't raise money until I went, full time for two reasons. One, quite frankly, was, I was about to say greed, but I think it was a lack of abundance and, realizing that, initially my thought was, well, I want to keep this all for myself. Right. And I was buying, 4 families and single family homes and a duplex and a triplex. And, I wasn't getting ahead as fast as I really wanted to. And then I realized how I had this, one of my mentors had said, you're not you're not giving stuff up, because basically what you're allowing other people to do is participate in the opportunity you're creating, which allows you to A, move faster, and B, think bigger. And, my background in software, I'm like, okay, that I understand. And so that was something that kind of was a transition for me mentally. And I started raising money back in late 2018. And, that's where it really took off.
You said a couple things. One, you funded those initial deals yourself, really taking some of those sales proceeds from your commission checks,
Yep.
and that allowed you to go out there and invest in these deals. You had a trusted team, so you were able to kind of build that up while managing your day job. Then once you were able to go as a full-time investor, that's when you started to warm up to the idea of raising capital, working with other investors, and recognizing the value you are providing for them. I want to go back to the trusted team thing, though, because
Sure.
I think it's important, right? If you mentioned you had your contractors and folks that you knew that they could go out there and do the job so you could lock in on your day job, how did you build that trust? Because that's one of the things I know for investors, it's so tough, man, starting out to get people that you can really rely on, that you can trust. And again, when you don't have that time, if you've got a demanding W-2 job, it's the reason people do invest passively, because trying to invest in a deal where you've got to be hands-on or confirming guys are doing what they're supposed to be doing,
Yep.
it's a lot starting out. So how were you able to build that trust with your team?
I started super small. So the 4-family I bought in East Hartford, I had 2 different contractors rehab 2 different units. And, one of them took their time and, wasn't really keeping up from a time perspective, although budget wise, he was great, actually. The second one was coming to me proactively and saying, hey, look, I noticed this about the plumbing. And so I just fixed it, because I know if we proceeded to do what you wanted to do and didn't fix it, it was going to be a problem for you a year from now. And I went, that's my guy right there. And I actually still used both of them going forward. But the second one was the person that, I really started to count on. And, so then the projects get a little bigger, right? And it's okay. Instead of just that one unit, why don't you take the other 2 units and let's see how that goes? And then it was, hey, I bought a single family and it's a wreck. Can you help me with that? Absolutely. Okay, here's the scope. You agree, we agree, off we go. And, it got to the point where I could just hand John the keys and be like, all right, dude, here's the work scope. Here are the keys. Here's my budget. Do not exceed here, and here. Tell me where the risk is. I got to go, right? I got to get on a plane. And that worked really, really well for many years, to the point where I was doing so much work. He finally came to me after 6-7 years and said, in all candor, Ed, I gotta get off this train, because I'm doing so much for you. I'm not doing the kitchens and bathrooms and other stuff that I do that, quite frankly, is really high margin for me. And so we kind of figured out a balance, and then that kind of got smaller and smaller and smaller as his business really took off. We're still friends, but we don't work together unless I'm really stuck. But yeah, I mean, that relationship has been invaluable. Not only was I able to move mountains with a relatively small team, but I was also able to, like you said earlier, keep my W-2 job, which was paying the bills, right? And be able to do this on the side and know that wasn't going to be a stress fest for me.
And I love what you talked about. One, and there's something I was reading last week. I can't remember the book, but in one of the books I was reading, it talked about the best way to hire is through basically starting to work with people, right? So it's hiring through an audition.
Yep.
And part of that process is, it was Dan Martell's book.
Okay.
And Buy Back Your Time, I believe is the name of the book.
Yeah, excellent
And
book.
he was talking about, listen, if you want to hire great people, the best thing is you just have to test them out. You can try to do that through an interview process, or you can try to do that through an audition. And that's kind of what you did, right? You end up hiring them, but it's like, hey, I'm gonna give you a small project, or I'm gonna give you 1 unit. I'm gonna give you this. And then let's see how you work. Let's see how you operate. And from there, I can give you more. I can see where maybe you might need a little coaching or a little assistance, or maybe this guy isn't that great with time frames, but he's honest and shows up. And right. So now you kind of know what you're working with, and you can kind of expand from there. And that's what you've been able to do for, sounds like, around 7 years or so, until that contractor got to the point where it's like, listen, this is great, but I need to also do these high margin projects, which allow me to feed my family. Because as you know, with investors, we don't necessarily have a reputation for paying top dollars. So that's one of the things with contractors is when you find a great contractor, it can be challenging because the really good ones recognize their value and they can go and do retail work and get paid much more or go do, larger commercial projects. So it can be a challenge, especially when you're doing more residential real estate. From your standpoint, if you were starting over today and you were out there trying to build your team,
Mhm.
what steps would you take or what are some clues that you can deliver to our listeners to help them find the right folks when you're starting out?
My first piece of advice is rock stars, no rock stars, right? So if you are working with somebody or you get referred to somebody who turns out to be really good, guaranteed that carpenter knows a really good plumber, knows a really good electrician. And the big question I ask all of them is, who do you like to follow? Right. So if you're coming in and you're a drywall guy, I want to know who's the framer you like to follow or who's the carpenter you like to follow. If you're a kitchen guy, same thing. I want to know who is the carpenter who's, setting up your space so that you can lay your cabinets plumb and level and so on and so forth. So that is absolutely. I mean, I found John actually from a granite countertop guy that I knew. And the question was, who do you like? Who do you like to follow when you're laying your countertops? And he pointed me to John and said, he's the best around. And he is.
I love it, man. That's phenomenal advice. That's golden right there because what you're getting at is the person who has to follow someone is paying way more attention to the quality of work, the detail, like just how they leave a project, how they operate.
Yep.
They're going to know who does it the right way. And that's going to be the best recommendation you can get. It's the person whose job is responsible for the person in front of them doing it the right way. You could try to go the other way too, but if you're a painter, you absolutely know who's really good at hanging drywall, right? Because if you've had to go paint and you realize, oh, they didn't do this right now, I got to go patch this up or I got to go do this. That's going to be annoying, right? You're not going to want to work with those guys. So that's a really, really insightful comment if you're looking for people to build your team. John, you got me talking about John now too. Ed, talk to me about scaling the business, right? So you mentioned you were, flipping these houses,
Yep.
buying multifamily, and then you warmed up to the idea of raising capital. And at one point, I know you got your portfolio up to around 500 units.
Correct.
Talk to me about some of the benefits and some of the challenges of scaling that portfolio.
Yeah. So it really comes down to a handful of very simple things, right? When so one of them was a mindset shift, which I kind of alluded to, but I'll get a little more explicit about. Part of my hesitancy to raise money was I didn't want to ask my friends and family for money, right? And that mind shift of you're not actually asking them, you're not going to mom, right, who was one of my first investors, and saying, hey, mom, can I borrow $100,000 out of your retirement account? You're going to her and saying, hey, look, you're making, 7% in your 401k. You're 15 years away from retirement. If I could pay you 12 just as reliably or 15 or 20 or whatever the number is that something that you'd want to do? Is that a return that you'd want to, examine or take a look at? And, I had my mom said yes. I had, plenty of folks that said absolutely would love to. I had a few people who didn't quite get it in terms of is real estate really as reliable, as conservative an investment as I was talking about. And then there's, a couple people who were like, nope, my financial guy says stay in the stock market and cool, that's fine. So that was a big shift for me. The second piece of it was replicating my team elsewhere, because to get to where we got, and, the reason that I've kind of sold off is in 21, 22, I saw the writing on the wall and saw an opportunity to recapitalize and pay down debt. And so that's what we did. And cause, I'm older, right? I'm 56, and I'll get into why I did it in a minute. But, in terms of scaling, the next piece of this was team, right? And so I had to replicate people. At one point, we had 5 different crews cooking because we had one. So I focused specifically, with one exception, in Connecticut, and the one exception was in Vermont, where I had a very strong partner who was handling everything, and I was just the money guy. But the whole idea is to be able to replicate those teams and have them execute at the a similar level. And that's the third piece of this, and that's systems, right? So I'm a techie guy, so I think in terms of process, and I look at technology as a force multiplier. I still do. And, this whole AI thing's got me, I'm absolutely fascinated. And so the idea is that, we put technology in place so that it made everybody's lives a lot easier. So they weren't, we weren't dialing and going back and forth and trying to figure stuff out. We had a system that, off their phone, they could simply report, there are basically 4 questions that I ask every week. And it's, what'd you get done this week? What are you going to get done next week? Where do you need my help? Do you have questions? And what's standing in your way? And how can I help? Right. Other than that, I leave them alone. And because they're good at what they do and they don't need me, even though, if I'm swinging a hammer on a crew, yeah, we'll probably be okay, but it's not the most efficient use of their time or mine. And so that was a big piece. And that was the thing that started really accelerating our growth, was that we could do a lot more with the same amount of headcount. And so we never got to be a huge company. I mean, we're 9 people today, and most of those folks live in the Philippines, and they run our back office using the technology that we've put in place, and I've kind of gone headfirst into the AI thing. Our receptionists and our lead qualifications and the way that we interact initially with potential investors and potential sellers. And, that's all handled by technology. They don't talk to a human being until the AI says they're qualified, and then they get me. So there's a lot we can do to do outreach, to do intake, to support the internal team, as well as potential sellers and potential investors. And so that was a huge piece of this. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we grew, is because I'm a nut about that stuff. So we systemized everything. There's a checklist for everything we do.
Yeah, let's talk about that growth, right? You mentioned being
Sure.
able to scale through systems, through teams, and getting the right people, asking the right 4 questions each week to those individuals. How does the business function now? Like, I know you raise capital as well. You got source deals. So is it kind of a full service real estate investment firm?
So we were vertically integrated. I did have a property management company, a Clark Street Management, and I've realized that we are more effective being the asset manager rather than the property manager. And so the almost 7 years that we were running our properties taught us a lot. And so we're crystal clear on what we're tracking and how we support our residents and how we operate. Now the objective is, okay, how do we identify talented property managers in the markets that we're working in that will live up to our standards? And it's not for everybody, and that's fine. But the base thesis of our investing effort is that I want to create a place. So there's a doing well by doing good, right? The fact is that when I was growing up, I lived in the buildings, similar buildings that I now own, right? And so I have a massive amount of respect for people that have 2 and 3 jobs and get up and take care of their families. And so my role here in that relationship is to provide them a clean, safe, and well-acquitted place that people are proud to live in. Base thesis of our operation is longevity. And so, the average resident tenant here in the state of Connecticut lives somewhere in the 18, 19 month range in terms of staying in one place, and then they move. That's hard, especially when you have kids, right? Our goal right now, our metric is just a hair over 4.2 years. Which, is where we want it to be. I'd love to get it to be longer. But the fact is that people stay way longer because, we treat them like customers. They pick up the phone. Hey, I got a problem. Hey, I got a question. They get an answer that day, or they get help that day immediately. And so, the idea being that if you treat them well, they're and you give them respect and they're heard, that, they're going to stay. And here's the payoff business wise. So I feel good about that, right? I get to lay my head on the pillow every night knowing that I'm doing right by these people. I'm also doing right by my investors and myself, frankly, and that's because with every turn, in other words, every time somebody moves out and somebody else moves in, it costs us $2,000 to $5,000 to bring that apartment back to brand new condition. And every year that somebody re-ups, I don't have to spend that cash. And that money goes directly to the bottom line, directly to NOI. And thus, when I tell people, like when I talk to investors and I say, hey, look, 10-unit apartment building to the right, 10-unit apartment to the left that I own, I guarantee you, mine's A, cash flowing better, and B, way more valuable. And that's why. That is the base reason why.
Yeah, I mean, Ed, what you're getting at is really in the operational side, right? There's a feel-good component to what you do, but it also shows up in business because if you can keep those tenants staying there 4+ years, well, that's 4 years where you don't have to do the turnovers. You don't have to go in there and repaint. You don't have to go in there and, change out carpet and all these other things. And that adds up. And a lot of times investors, they implement a value add multifamily strategy and it sounds good on paper and the numbers look great. But the reality is if you spend $5,000 to turn a unit to push rents $100 and that tenant only stays 1 year, well, yes, you've gotten a $1,200 premium, but then you got to go spend another $5,000. Right. So it just doesn't add up. You really have to keep that tenant there for, again, 3, 4, 5 years for it to even justify that being the reason that whether it be push the rents out or whatever the case may be with that tenant leaving. But it's way easier if you can retain those residents. Now, clearly, the other portion of that comes in building community, because for folks to stay, they have to be in a place where they feel comfortable. It feels like home. To your point, you're getting your questions or your issues resolved. And that, from an operation standpoint, can be challenging. You mentioned that you all are better at the asset management than just the property management. But the property management, that's what the customers see, right? That's what the resident sees and interacts with. Can you talk a little bit more about how you all are shifting as far as how you're planning on continuing to deliver that quality service while shifting your approach to property management?
So just because we're not managing day to day doesn't mean we don't have contact with the residents, right? I mean, the fact is that they know, I walk every property probably every month or two, and I'm not bashful. And I'm also hard to hide, right? I'm a 6'4", I'm a big dude, right? So it's not like I blend, and, I'm wearing my Clark Street apparel and all that. So but the fact is that I have been well known to knock on doors and ask, how's it going? Right. And because I really want to know. Most of the time that's good news. Occasionally it's, hey, I got something I need to talk to you about. No problem. Let's have it. And now it's my job to solve that as opposed to the property manager's job. And that's not a fun phone call for the property manager. So, we try to reduce those as much as possible, but I'm still present. They know it's me. They know that this is a Clark Street building. There's a hotline in every foyer of every building we own that says, hey, if you need help and you're not getting it, or I'm paraphrasing, I'm not really doing a good, but it's like, hey, here is the resident hotline. And it's a phone number that hits me, my partner, and as well as the property managers. And that is the bat phone, right? That is, hey, I got something that I really need to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to. It doesn't ring that often, thank God, but it does every once in a while. It's also the bat phone for, the classic blood, flood, or fire, right? So if there's something that's really going on, someone's hurt, there's a fire, water leak, that's when it's all hands on deck. And, at least one of us is getting in the car and going to see what's going on. Right. So,
yeah. Ed, what I want to make sure gets captured is you're still pretty hands-on. And I think the mistake a lot of investors make is you listen to guys like us talk on a podcast and you hear to scale up, you got to hire a third-party manager, and you do that, and then they want to step back. And this isn't just in real estate. I hear this in other businesses too. You're
same in software.
You're a founder. You're a founder. Right. You hire a new CEO. You're like, great, someone else is taking on the work and
Yeah, it's
you,
not the way
you
this works.
relax and then they, whether it be run into the ground or they just make different decisions.
Right.
And the key is you still have to own it. So when we talk about being the asset manager, that's really what you're saying. You're saying that you're still ultimately responsible for the production and the execution at that property. You may not be the person taking that request from the tenant necessarily,
Right.
but you're the one to make sure the business is operating at the right level. And so many investors, they lose sight of that where they want to step back and just trust a third party manager. And maybe they just do a monthly meeting and, maybe two,
Some don't
three,
even do
4 months down the road, you find out there's something really going on there. But at that point, it's been going on for a full quarter versus your approach. You're still walking these properties. You're still letting your face be seen by the residents. The on-site property managers know that you're present. You've got the one, the hotline number in each building. So there's a mechanism there to get the feedback you need at what's going on at the property so
Yep.
you can keep things afloat, but also address issues right away. And I think that's a really important lesson for our listeners to take away.
Yeah, thank you. And the other part of it is that just like in my corporate days, right? Where when I was a young manager, I tried to do everything and I was crappy at it. And then when I finally realized that the people that I had hired were really good at their jobs and I should just get the hell out of their way, that's when it really kind of took off. And I took that lesson and that I learned the hard way. Cause I wasn't, at 29 or 30 or 31, I was a crappy manager. Right. But, what I realized was if I could get to the point where I would bring in high quality people or at least average people with really good systems so that they could execute, then I would be able to manage the business as opposed to managing the things that happen every day. And while I need to know about those things, I don't need to do those things. So Dan Martell, Dan Sullivan, who, not how is mantra here at, Clark Street is, okay, awesome idea. What somebody suggests an awesome idea, point to the human being that's going to own it. Not named Ed Mathews because I can't. I got too much. I'm already full. Right. So that's one of the first filters whenever we talk about bringing on another property manager or going after another asset class, or because we're here in the Northeast, multifamily, been pretty slow, not a lot of penciling out. And so we've looked at other things and we had kind of dialed back our flip business and have since decided to crank it back up just because multifamily was kind of slow. And, again, the question was, okay, point to the human being that's going to run it because I don't have time. And so then it's okay. The next layer of that is, okay, what do we need to put in place operationally, from a process, systems, that kind of thing to support that effort? And again, who owns it?
Systems and processes are important in any business, and we're always trying to find great, A players. But as you mentioned, sometimes that's just not a reality. And you're going to have to find average players and give them a great system and process to get the most value out of them. Give me like something you guys do as far as a system that you don't see or hear other people doing very often.
Wow, great question. So, let me take a half step back and then I'll take a step forward. So, half step back was I had a guy by the name of Nick Huber. He's big on like Twitter and all that. He was on my show and he said something to me, and this I'm going back 3-4 years and 2-3 years. And he said, look, my job as CEO is not necessarily to hire A players because there aren't a lot of them out there. My job is to put operations in place, systems and processes that let average regular people walk in the door and succeed. And I was like, that is what he crystallized what I've been trying to do, for the latter part of my career. And so that's the thing that we are focused on. The things that we do that a lot of investors either don't do or starting to do, we use AI heavily. In the last 12, 16 months, 15 months, we've gone from, using technologies like property management wise, we use a tool called Hemlane, which is pretty good. We've relied heavily on them because they provide the front, the tier one support, 24 hour. It solves the 2 a.m. Hey, my toilets leaking
Yep.
problem, right? Um, but now we've taken AI to the point where we're doing, outreach to potential investors, potential sellers. Like I know in the state of Connecticut, there are 1,208 buildings that I'd like to either I have owned or I'd like to own at some point in my career. And so every month, those 1,208 owners get some sort of communication from me or from my team in terms of a letter, in terms of an email, in terms of a phone call. All of it is, and by phone call, it can mean one of three things. It can be a human being calling. It can be what's called a voicemail drop, which I can get into, or, it is actually our AI calling them and going through a script. It's more and more, it's becoming the AI than anything else now that we're getting good at it. So I think there's a lot of that. I think that we're taking that AI capability and also applying it to our relationship with our residents so we can be more proactive and reach out to them. There's an ethical part of it in that with everybody that we deal with, that we have to kind of wave a flag and say, hey, this is an AI, this isn't a human being. But that's answered with, I named our receptionist Katie after my oldest daughter. This is Katie, I'm an AI assistant and I'm calling because blah, blah, blah. Right. And so they know what they're dealing with, but they also have access to someone that, if they say, hey, I've got a problem or hey, I need help, I get a text message and probably a phone call if it's an emergency immediately. And so it allows, my small team to manage a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts, pretty efficiently.
No, I love it, man. You're talking about AI, and AI is obviously something that is continuing to grow and change and revolutionize how all of us do business. But beyond that, it comes down to systems and processes. And like you said, the goal isn't necessarily to recruit A players. The goal is to create systems and processes where the average person can come in and succeed and remove those obstacles, because that's what separates those who are successful from those who don't.
Yep.
And everyone always wants to go back to like the McDonald's example, and it's a great one because I don't know, I've never heard anyone say McDonald's has the greatest hamburger in the world. Like most of us recognize that's not the case, but it's consistent. You're going to get the same burger everywhere you go across the world, right? There are times when I can go to my favorite restaurant, and depending on who the chef is that day or who, who's in the back, it may taste a little different, right? Based on how they decide to flavor it and season it and whatnot. So that consistency is huge. And as a business owner, if you have consistency in execution, you can always understand what you need to improve upon and adjust. It's just tough when, Katie's great, but Jenny always forgets to follow up with these three things, right? Like now you're trying to figure out, okay, well, do we need to train Jenny better? Do we need to have Katie stay? Do we need to promote, Katie? That's where it gets challenging. But if you got that system where everything is more uniform, that's where you can really hone in as a business owner and find success because you're not relying on that A+ player.
Right. And the other part of it is expectations, right? We do our best, and it's, we're dealing with human beings. I'm a human being, and, it's not perfect, but we work on it all the time. And that is, we set expectations with, people outside the company, investors, sellers, residents, contractors, whatever. And we set expectations on the internal with our team so that everybody knows, A, what our role is, and B, what our expectations are, right? So, if we get a phone call from the bat phone, that placard that sits in the foyer, our job is to respond to that, if not immediately, within 1 hour. Right. And it's, when I become aware of one of those phone calls, first question is, okay, how fast do we get back to them? Okay. What's the situation now? Is it resolved? Do you need me, or do you need, Mike, my partner, or somebody else? And it's, those expectations are crystal clear. It's part of our onboarding process, and it's reinforced pretty much with every team meeting, either through the questions that I ask or, the fact that, hey guys, we've been slipping a little bit over here. We need to focus on this. And I'm cool with mistakes. I don't mind, right? I think the way you get better at something is you break it. You do dumb stuff, you break it. And if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you I'm the king of doing dumb stuff, right? But God bless her. But the fact is that I think you learn a lot more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And so We treat mistakes as an opportunity, not as I'm not really a yeller anyway, but, I look at like when we bring people in and somebody screws up, they think the next team meeting is going to be a barn burner. And it's like, okay, well, what happened? Walk me through it. How would you, this is the way we typically do it. How do you think you should have handled that? Okay. You going to do it again? No. Right. And I mean, it's that simple. If it happens again, then it's an arm around the shoulder and like, hey, look, we gotta tighten up here. But I think the way that, regular people come in and execute really good systems and processes well is through screwing up, learning, and, dusting yourself off and moving forward.
There's also a component to, you mentioned the follow up and just really, having this being repeated in each meeting. It's interesting because there's places I'm sure you've worked to at some point in your career where everyone has those values on the wall, right? And they have systems and a way of doing something. And then you find out there's a lot of places they have them there, but no one's checked it, right? No one follows up. That's not really how we do business, right? And then there are places where like, no, this is exactly how we do it. This is protocol. And I remember, man, I was in advertising and marketing. I did that for 15 years. And most agencies are pretty fluid because it's creative, right? You have a process for like how creative gets approved and reviewed, but not really for the creative process. And I remember I'd interviewed for a number of companies, and I interviewed at Harley Davidson. Guy I worked with at GM. He had left and became CMO of Harley Davidson. And I interviewed, and it was the first time in my career where every single person I spoke to knew what the goals were for the company.
Yeah.
And they all said it in the meeting. Here's our priorities. Here's where we're focused. And the reason it's important is because, well, the dollars can follow that. You can't say, hey, our priorities are X, Y, Z, yet not increase the budget to deliver on X, Y, Z, right? And that's what I would see a lot of my career is like, well, oh, we need to grow with this group, but we're not really going to increase the budget for that group. We're going to keep doing the thing we've been doing. And I'm like, well, how do you, it's not really goals, what you're saying. So it's important. I think, again, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we have to make sure we're following through with that, because if we say, hey, it's important to get back to a customer or a client within an hour, or there's an inquiry that comes and we got to stay on top of that. Well, how are we measuring it? How are we making sure that that happens? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a punishment, but you definitely have to create the environment, the culture where it's clear this is a priority and it is the expectation that we are following up with, any resident within a certain amount of time. And that needs to be documented. It needs to be something we can all, follow up on, because that's how you get to the average resident staying 4.2 years and not 18 or 19 months. Right. These little things are actually really big things that demonstrate the overall value of the company and what your values are.
The other piece of advice I would give around that is the tendency, and I'm one of these people as well, is to add key performance indicators, metrics, whatever, and have 24 of them. Nobody can keep that straight. Make it 3, right? What are the 3 most important things to know that tell you you're doing it right? And every aspect of your business, you should have no more than 3 metrics or KPIs or whatever you want to call them, for responsiveness to your residents, or how you manage your residents, how you manage the property managers that work for you, how you work with contractors. Like I said earlier, I ask contractors 4 questions every week, not 5, not 2, 4. And as soon as I get satisfactory answers to those 4, I'm done. We're good. It's a 10-minute meeting. And they know what they have to do. I know what I have to do, and off we go. And so it's keeping it as simple as humanly possible. It also makes building systems a whole lot easier, right? Look at a task area, look at the things that the actions you have to take. And then, can we enable it technology wise? Can we delegate it? Can we outsource it? What are the things that, and then if we're outsourcing or delegating, how are we going to hold that person or entity accountable? It's 3 metrics, whatever that system is.
Ed, I love that. You mentioned that you guys are kind of repositioning to scale up again, right? You're doing some flips now, but you think the market opportunity is ripe for more investments. Talk to us about how you plan on approaching that opportunity.
So twofold. One, we sold off a whole bunch of units over the last 3 years And the goal was to basically reposition and trade up. So we're playing Monopoly, right? I've sold off all the houses and now I want to go buy hotels. And so the idea is instead of buying, 4 10-unit buildings, I want to buy one 50-unit building or one, and here in Connecticut, not a lot of them come on the market. So we've got to be very strategic about how we approach that. Hence the 1,208 properties in the state that I would love to, own someday. I don't think I'll ever get there, but if we got, 50 of them, that would be cool. And bought and sold over time, right? And the whole idea is to look at much larger opportunities. I think that is, and we're starting to raise money again. The way that we're doing that this time, as opposed to project by project where we either did joint ventures or syndications, this time we've started a debt fund to help with the smaller properties. And that really is more focused on other investors. So, we've created this fund and, the idea is we have a group of probably 40, 50 very well vetted, very well known and experienced real estate investors who probably aren't as far along as we are. We're all reading the same book and I'm on chapter, 15. They may be on chapter 4. You're on chapter, 27. And, there's a way to, and so we're supporting and taking opportunity in terms of supporting those smaller investors and, basically loaning them money via the fund to help them buy their properties. And we make our little slice and everybody wins, rising tide, right? The other part of it is we're going to launch a private equity fund first quarter next year. And that is going to be our acquisition fund for us and our investors to go get these bigger properties. So,
I love it.
That's going to be fun.
I love it. Yeah, man. So you got 2 funds there, man. Sounds like some great opportunities for investors and folks who want to learn more. What's the best way for them to reach out?
ed@clarkst.com is the best way. You can reach out via our website or just email me. And I'm happy to, as I tell people, I'll buy anybody a cup of coffee virtually or otherwise. So, if you're looking to learn, if you're looking to do this and you want to pick my brain, feel free to give me a shout. I'm happy to help.
Ed, great having you on, man. A couple of things stand
Thanks,
out. One is just, again, mindset. You're sitting in corporate America, working in software sales, and just realize I'm done. I'm missing too much of my family time, missing these summers that we get, and I want to lock in on that. Real estate was the vehicle to help you make that transition. So you focused on that, starting with flipping houses, getting into some smaller multifamily, but slowly building up that larger portfolio. And then talking to us about building our great teams, using systems, using processes, but staying actively involved, being engaged, making sure that residents see you, your team sees you. And it's not something that, you're just handing off to someone else. You're still actively involved, but leveraging the team to do the day-to-day heavy lifting. Again, for folks that want to learn more, or you can email ed@clarkst.com. Hey, great stuff, man. Great conversation as always.
Pleasure.
Look forward to staying in touch with you. And we hope you have a great day. All right.
You too, John. Thanks.
Hey, best ever listeners, hope you enjoyed this conversation here today. If you did, give us some honest feedback with a rating and review and share this episode with someone who you think would get some great value from this discussion. And listen, we are hosting our best ever conference. That's right, year number 10. So BECX is coming up February 18th through the 20th in Salt Lake City. So be sure to get your ticket, meet me, and meet the rest of the best ever podcast hosts there. And we look forward to seeing you. Take care, everybody.